The truck convoy of 2022 and the subsequent Freedom Rally in Ottawa was something that both Canada and the world had never ever seen before. The Freedom Convoy captured the imaginations and hearts of so many people, millions of people around the world. It was also quite controversial, with many who were against it, leading to the federal government invoking the Emergencies Act. Tamara Lich became one of the central figures of the convoy and Freedom Rally, and she joins us now from her home in Medicine Hat, Alberta, to chat about some of that experience. Tamara, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Now let's go back to January of 2022. This was a completely new experience for Canadians. How did it all really begin for you? What led up to the Freedom Convoy?
Well, I think the convoy itself was a collection of a small group of people that had very similar ideas. For myself, I know that I got involved because I was really upset with the mandates and the restrictions. They were affecting my family, my friends, people that I cared about. And about the time the convoy got started, I recall they were starting to discuss interprovincial travel, restricting interprovincial travel. And of course, I've got a large family spread across the prairie. So that was a pretty huge concern of mine to not be able to see my granddaughter.
You know, some of the comments we heard from a lot of our news teams that we sent out to Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy was how many people were kneeling and praying for your group, praying for the entire Freedom Convoy. What feedback did you hear from those around you about all of the prayer that seemed to surround the event?
Well, I've said right from the beginning that I feel that the whole process, the whole experience itself was divine in that if we needed somebody, they showed up. If we needed somebody with a particular skill set, they showed up. It just happened that everything that happened, there was so many coincidences that they just couldn't be coincidences. And of course, the feedback that we got along the way, traveling across the country and even on the ground in Ottawa, was incredible. Very heartwarming.
Now, you did a lot of work behind the scenes, you and your team. Let's talk about the leadership during that period of time. What was it really like planning leading up to the Freedom Convoy, going all the way across the country, like you said, to Ottawa?
It was busy. I was up early in the morning, usually 5 or 6 in the morning, and going to bed at about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock at night. We were obviously working on many things like hotel rooms and stops and where we were going to get fuel and what was going to be happening when we got on the ground in Ottawa. So there was a small group of us that were in constant communication. And it was so hectic, but very exciting at the same time. And the great thing about it is that a lot of us that started off as strangers, I didn't know any of these people before the convoy, have now become like family.
Now, looking back, do you feel that there were some saboteurs in your midst? I mean, trying to maybe change the course to distract the core of the leadership group. We've even seen on the mainstream media some of the Nazi flags, Confederate flags. Now, do you feel those were actually plants and not part of your group?
Well, I don't know how they showed up. I know they weren't part of our group. It's quite suspect, especially the Nazi flag, how that just showed up one day. And then, as you saw in the mainstream media, that's all they talked about was a Confederate flag and a Nazi flag, and not the hundreds of thousands of Canadian flags that were out there. So it's fairly suspect that that gentleman with that flag showed up one day and then disappeared, and that's all they talked about. And I guess the other thing that I found after or at the inquiry was that they had people like myself and Chris Barber profiled before we even left. So I find it hard to believe that they don't know who that gentleman is.
Now, do you feel that sometimes you had a tough time getting your message across to Canadians through the mainstream media, and that's why you tapped into a lot of independent media, including Bridge City News?
Yes, actually, I don't think the mainstream media got anything right, really. And it really came down to media such as yourselves and other independent media sources and citizen journalists. I think the convoy was really the rise of the citizen journalists because we had all that footage from cell phones.
Now, looking back, Tamara, were there some experiences where maybe you thought, we shouldn't have gone down that road? I mean, we also interviewed a lot of Ottawa business owners who were irate with all of the amount of trucks that were in Ottawa and people trying to get to work. I used to live in Ottawa myself, in Orleans. I used to, work in downtown Ottawa, the Sun News Network. So Were there maybe some lessons learned along the way, things you would have done differently looking back?
Well, that's a whole can of worms, isn't it? I tend to not be kind of a what if person. I believe that everything that happened as it was supposed to happen. There's not too many things I think we could have done differently. To be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what we could have changed at this point.
How about, did you grow as a person as well, compared to when you started with the Freedom Convoy to afterwards, and including what happened with the invokement of the Emergencies Act?
I have much thicker skin.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we all have. I mean, I've always loved my country. I've always been passionate about my country. Have I always been proud of it? Not always, but that's for me what the convoy did was really reignite that Canadian spirit and again showed fundamentally who Canadians are. So I think it changed all of us in some form.
What are your thoughts when the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act?
I was shocked. I was actually shocked. The ironic thing about the invocation of the act was that me, my husband, and our legal team were actually on our way to go see Mr. Brian Peckford when the announcement came over the radio. So it was Keith Wilson that actually informed Mr. Peckford when we arrived that they were going to be invoking the act. And I mean, I was just shocked because there was no violence. There was no violence. Something that should be noted is that protesters and supporters stood outside of the prime minister's office every day for 3 weeks. There wasn't so much as a window smashed or graffiti on it or nothing. So yeah, I was really shocked. I thought that was a very heavy-handed tool to be using under the circumstances, especially in light of the fact that the border crossings had already been cleared.
So, how do you think this would have played out if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would have said, "Okay, Tamara, I want to sit down with you and the leadership group with the Freedom Convoy"?
Well, that's hard to say. I think if we would have had any type of indication that they were willing to even listen to us, that we would have started packing up and going home. Because let's face it, after 3 weeks in the middle of winter in Ontario, we were tired, we were exhausted, we were away from our families and our jobs, and I think just a show of good faith would have went a long ways.
How about your thoughts on the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act? I mean, we learned that the Ottawa police really didn't do their job, potentially, and that's why more reinforcements had to be brought in. What are your thoughts with Justice Rouleau's report?
Yeah, that was not a shock, I guess, but still a shock. I think a lot of us expected that outcome, but we had held out hope that it would have been different. What it did basically was say that government incompetence is a reason to invoke the Emergencies Act, and yeah, I was quite disappointed with the results. When we first got to the inquiry, I felt like we were going to be listened to. I thought he was really hearing, the convoy organizers' testimony and taking it all in. And then towards the end of it, it became very clear that um, it wasn't going to be that way. With the shenanigans, I know you've had Eva and Keith and them on your show
Yeah.
before. The document dumps late at night, all the redactions, the cabinet confidentiality and parliamentary privilege that was used as an excuse when in reality there wasn't any in some cases. So, yeah, it was disappointing for sure.
Let's talk about some of the money donated through various online media platforms like GoFundMe and GiveSendGo. Did you and your group ever receive much of that funding?
We received the initial million that was released. I believe that was the very end of January. And of course, that was all frozen immediately, pretty much immediately, anyways. GoFundMe ended up refunding everything. And then we started that fundraiser with Give Send Go. They also ended up refunding most of it. Of course, there was some that was in a payment processor that all that money's tied up in an escrow account pending the lawsuits.
So how did a lot of the truckers feed themselves and get the fuel that they needed to keep going, to survive?
Canadians, Ottawa citizens, people, the donations that we received was unlike anything I've ever seen before. There was food, there was clothing, there was gloves, chapstick, dog food, baby formula. There was reefers full of donations from Canadians. And I'm not sure, Hal, if you ever had a chance to get to Ottawa during the convoy, but just about on every street corner, there was little kitchens set up, feeding people and feeding the homeless. And it was incredible.
We can't forget about the barbecues and the bouncy castles too, right?
That's right. The barbecues and the bouncy castles. Yes.
Tamara, I'm sure it seems to many Canadians that the government used you as a focal point for their power and allegedly some of their vengeance. What powered you to keep going during your tough times in court and even jail?
God, for lack of a better word. I recognized after my arrest when I was in jail that it was thy will, not my will, and that there was obviously more work for me to do. I believe that the convoy itself ended up exposing things like the mainstream media and the banking system and, organizations like GoFundMe. And I felt that there was just more work that needed to be done, and I just put one foot in front of the other and trusted that I was going to be okay. And here I am, just fine.
Can you talk about the level of support you received from your friends and family and different communities across the country?
Oh, the support has been incredible. Of course, my family has been amazing. My parents, as you know, led the convoy out in their pilot truck from Medicine Hat all the way to Ottawa. So that was a really amazing experience for me to have with my mom and dad. My friends have been amazing, and I've made so many new friends all across the country. My Canada has gotten considerably smaller in the months since the convoy, for sure.
You know, there are many differing opinions as to what the future holds for Albertans and Canadians, Tamara. What do you see as the future for Canada?
Well, that's a tough question. There's a lot going on in Canada right now, but I always have faith. I believe that good will always win, and I think we're headed in the right direction. So it'll be interesting to see how this Chinese interference nonsense all plays out. I mean, there's so much going on right now. It's hard to keep track of it all, isn't it?
It is absolutely. I want to circle back to your time in jail. Let's talk a bit about that experience and maybe people's lives that you touched while you were behind bars. Let's just talk about the time specifically. What was that like for you?
I met some pretty good people in there, and I did have some support from some of the guards and personnel that worked there. There was people when I was originally arrested last winter. There was actually a couple girls from the convoy that were in jail already. That not They weren't organizers, but they had just been caught getting supplies and stuff. So and we weren't too sure, and by we, I mean myself and some of the officers that at the remand center, we weren't too sure what they were going to think of me. And I remember these two officers calling me into this room, and they explained that they dealt with high profile cases, and they were wondering if I was worried for my safety in there, and explained to me, what happens to women that don't get along with other women in jail. So I remember at the end of the conversation, one of the officers asked if I was worried or concerned, and I said, "Well, I wasn't, but I kind of am now." But no, you know what? They were great. Um, a lot of the ladies that I met in jail are wonderful people. They're stuck in the addictions cycle, and which is too bad. But the staff, and even at the courthouse too, I had so much support at the courthouse. So it was quite an experience for someone who's never even been in Facebook jail
Yeah.
before.
So, can you fill in our viewers where it stands right now? Are you still facing any charges?
Yeah, so our trial, Chris Barber and I, of course, are co-accused, and our trial is scheduled to start September the 5th in Ottawa. And so really looking forward to getting those charges dealt with, and hopefully everything stays on the timeline that we have as it sits right now.
And what are the charges? Did they tell you specifically?
Mischief, counseling to commit mischief, intimidation, I think is one, and counseling intimidation, and I want to say disobey a public order, and there's something else too. I can't remember.
Wow. Tamara, let me ask you something. Do you potentially see another Freedom Convoy in our future?
Not with me involved in it anyways. I'm
Why
still dealing
not?
with
Come
the first
on.
one.
You've got the
I'm still dealing
experience.
with the first one. You know how I think the convoy was a once in a lifetime experience? I think it was a perfect storm of a bunch of different circumstances and events, and I don't know if we'll ever see that again in my lifetime.
Tamara Lich was one of the organizers of the Freedom Convoy. They captured the imaginations of so many around the world, and she joined us from Medicine Hat. Tamara, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.